Is it water with the sheep in the box?
This video was originally going to be part of my upcoming project about ghost hunters, which should be coming out at some point soon, but it seemed like too much of a tangent and, if anything, kind of distracted from the overall video, so here it is as its own separate thing. It's not essential viewing in order to enjoy the Ghost Hunters video, but in my opinion it is important to have the full context of psychics and their toxic influence over some of the most vulnerable people in our society before going into it, as sadly psychics have a place in a lot of our culture, including, but unfortunately not limited to, paranormal bullshit. When we talk about psychics and mediums, it's impossible to avoid bringing up the obvious charlatans, the clowns, the people who are just comically bad at what they do and are easy to mock, and originally that's what I spent most of this video doing, but being honest here, the most famous ones are probably not the dangerous ones or the ones you need to look out for. Indeed, the ghost hunting TV psychics are the least concerning in my opinion, outside of the fact that they serve to popularise and legitimise the practice more generally. We could point and laugh at Derek Acorah for losing his shit and unconvincingly relaying messages from the other side through his spirit guide Sam.
Can you show yourselves to us? Can you show yourselves to us? Where will you show yourself to us? Will you show yourself to us in this room? Will you show us in the cellar?
Oh!
Derek, you're all right. Get up.
I think I've shit myself.
You're all right. Derek,
I think I've shit myself.
Derek, Derek, Derek.
I've shit myself.
Can you hear me? Yes, you're all right.
Shit myself.
You're all right. Is it in your chest?
Oh, it's in my van. Shit myself.
It's in his chest. Everybody outside.
But most of the time, these ghost hunting shows go to old buildings long since deserted, and the people who died there have nobody still around who loved them to be manipulated or upset by this bullshit, so it's comparatively harmless in my opinion. The problem is that the ghost hunting psychics like Derek are not the most common kind, and rarely, if ever, do much ghost hunting. Bringing a psychic along on a ghost hunt can be a fun way to add flavour or manufacture evidence where there isn't any, but in my opinion that should be their only real function within society. Unfortunately, it is not. Think about true crime content online. As a comparison, it's fun to learn about and speculate upon the crimes of Jack the Ripper or the Zodiac Killer, primarily because almost nobody nowadays knows or remembers any of the victims, and it's important to never be seen to empathise with or support the monsters by being disrespectful to their victims. But there's definitely content out there, a lot of it, that breaks these rules, and whilst there's utility in using this content to explore failings of the legal system, lessons to be learned, perhaps even uncover new evidence, a lot of the time it's used as a sort of campfire horror story, and some even go a step further and toe the line of actively identifying with the killer or treating them like evil geniuses or whatever. For example, quick tip for any budding Netflix documentarians out there: making content about Israel Keys, a serial killer operating in 2017, is inadvisable, and especially if you're going to put the selfie he took with the corpse of one of his victims up on screen, is especially distasteful because the family of that person are still grieving. A few podcasts and YouTubers have already started doing that, but for the love of God, we don't need a Keys tape documentary, and let's not forget the Ted Bundy documentary, which inspired a bunch of sickos online to start simping over him a few years back, likewise for the Dharma series more recently. Of course, we spoke extensively about this in my video on the subject, but I think the comparison is rather apt here. As a psychic or someone using paranormal stuff to make money, it's important to avoid talking about real, recent people who died, speaking for them, or in some way re-traumatizing their families. The more ethical ones and ghost hunting shows do tend to avoid this trap, though some either don't bother or don't care, and some shows, like Psychic Detectives, and other shows following people actively hindering police investigations, giving families of homicide victims false hope, or inadvertently perverting the course of justice for personal gain on a demented power trip, seem actively malicious. But let's not forget that this is not your average medium's day job. Now, as it turns out, lying and seeing ghosts in an old castle or whatever is actually one of the most ethical things a medium can do. And that's pretty fucking unethical to begin with. Look, let's stop beating around the bush here. What these fucking people do 99% of the time is lie to bereaved and grieving people, vulnerable people, about their deceased family members, pretending to be able to contact or speak with them from beyond death, and even in some cases speak for them. Or sometimes they just do magic tricks and pretend to have psychic powers, conning people out of money in exchange for telling their future, or some other supernatural service. They are at best disgusting, opportunistic, lying charlatans preying on some of the most vulnerable for money and a sense of power and adoration, relying on a mixture of cold reading, asking vague and leading generic questions in order to appear like they're being profound when they're actually just taking a guess, and hot reading, actively researching the subject and using that information to inform a so-called reading, to appear as if they're actually able to speak to the dead. These people exist primarily to take advantage of the vulnerable. Much as we may like to think that most people who go to a psychic are just gullible idiots who arguably deserve to be scammed if they're going to fall for such obvious nonsense, in the same way people talk about the victims of obvious crypto scams who are often just victims of their own greed, the fact of the matter is that these people are actively preying on the grieving. Much like those cold calling and email scams primarily target the elderly who may not be as sound of mind or clued up enough on the modern world to see through the scam, especially those who may not necessarily have younger family members who may be able to help them, the psychic's primary target is those who have recently suffered a bereavement and offer them a chance to speak to a lost loved one from beyond the grave. These are people who, as mentioned, are desperate and grieving and would give anything to speak to their departed loved one just once more, and these people pretend to be able to grant them that wish. And honestly, I get that urge on the victim's side. I mean, having lost 2 grandparents in the last few years, I can attest that the worst part of losing someone you care deeply about is the knowledge that you can never see or speak to them again. I don't believe in psychics at all, but if I did, or if I was amenable to spiritualism, I can definitely see the allure of shelling out for the chance to speak to my granddad or my granny one last time, tell them that I love them and that they're missed. But the simple fact of the matter is that nobody can connect to the other side. Spirits do not visit us, and there is no such thing as a person who can converse with or channel the spirits. Every time one of these people is tested in an actual scientific environment, they immediately fall apart. It is actually illegal for a psychic to declare themselves anything other than an entertainer in a number of countries. In fact, the only reason the practice is still legal at all in many places is because it has been recategorized in this way. The "it's just a joke bro" defense is a classic, though it seems the psychics were better at using it than Alex Jones was, so I guess it's not a guarantee. The idea of this recategorization being, at least according to the psychics and the defenders, that most people realize that it's bullshit, but it's just a bit of harmless fun, just like Alex Jones was just joking and playing a character when he said the parents of murdered children were crisis actors. Meanwhile, these charlatans are telling your granny that her recently deceased husband has a message to pass along and wants to let her know that he's okay and still loves her, but first of all give him a bit of cash, yeah? That argument might work for your classic Mystic Meg carnival fortune teller, which is more likely just a form of novelty entertainment. But this shit? Nah, sorry, but this is just snake oil bullshit. Fuck psychics. As mentioned, the primary tool of the psychic is the cold read. So what's that? Well, in short, cold reading is a set of techniques that enable a psychic to appear to be saying things or providing information they couldn't possibly know, whilst in reality it's the subject, not the psychic, that is providing or interpreting that information. Generally, this works by analysing the person's body language as well as other visual signifiers during a line of questioning and making general statements that they think might appeal to or be relevant to people generally of that demographic. Cold readings mostly employ guesses based on probability, and that are general enough to potentially apply to a lot of people, quickly picking up on signals as to whether or not their guesses are in the right ballpark, and then emphasizing and reinforcing chance connections and quickly moving on from missed guesses. This generally works due to confirmation bias. If you've hired a psychic, or if you've paid to attend a show hosted by a psychic, you want to believe them by and large, so you're going in under the assumption that they know what they're doing. It's also why, if you go in as a skeptic, you're not going to be able to get the same results as a believer. Before starting the actual reading, the psychic will typically try to elicit cooperation from the subject, basically pushing them into providing all the information by saying something like, "I often see things that are a bit unclear, and some of the messages I receive from the other side may sometimes mean more to you than me. If you help, we can work together to interpret these messages." One of the most crucial elements of a convincing cold reading is a subject eager to make connections or reinterpret vague statements in any way that will help the reader appear to make specific predictions or intuitions. While the reader will do most of the talking, it is the subject who provides the meaning. This is why psychics' grift immediately falls apart if you aren't fully on board with their bullshit. If you actually expect them to provide the information or deliberately give them incorrect information, obviously the cold reading can't work. After determining that the target is a good victim, the psychic will start to make a number of probing questions or statements, prompting the subject to reveal further information with their replies, whether verbal or non-verbal, and they can continue from there, pursuing promising lines of inquiry while quickly abandoning or avoiding unproductive ones. In general, while the revelations seem to come from the reader, most of the facts and statements come from the subject, which are then redefined and restated by the reader so as to reinforce the idea that the reader got something correct rather than just repeating what the subject literally just said. The psychic will more likely than not pay close attention to subtle cues and indications such as changes in facial expression or body language to indicate whether a particular line of questioning is effective or not, and tailor their reading accordingly. Combining the techniques of cold reading with information obtained covertly, also called hot reading, a technique that is made incredibly easy by social media, as just googling someone using details obtained with either a pre-show questionnaire or even just the details they provided when purchasing their tickets, can bring up a lot of information. And in the case of famous people, and of course well-known haunted locations for the ghost hunting psychics, this is incredibly easy. A good example might be Derek Acorah's antics in the Great Pyramid. Obviously, stuff like that is public information, and the history is readily available to be used to inform his, well, this can only be described as a performance.
Who are you? Tell us about you. What kind of a man are you? Are you Khufu? What is the secret? What is the secret about this pyramid? What's the mystery behind it? Khafra. Khafra?
Is it Khafra? Your son?
Can leave a strong impression that the psychic knows or has access to a great deal of information about the subject, despite the fact that almost all of it was provided by the subject themselves, because the majority of time during a reading is spent dwelling on the hits the reader obtains, while the time spent recognizing misses is minimalized or dismissed as the psychic misinterpreting the communication from the other side. The overall effect is an impression that the psychic knows far more about the subject than an ordinary stranger could, and therefore is more likely to be believed when they claim to be in contact with otherworldly beings and spirits of the dead. As mentioned, this sort of thing has been studied for quite a while. Indeed, as James Underdown from the Centre for Inquiry and Independent Investigations group once said, in the context of a studio audience full of people, cold reading is not very impressive. Underdown explains cold reading from a mathematical point of view. A typical studio audience consists of approximately 200 people, divided up into 3 sections. A conservative estimate assumes each person knows 150 people. Underdown says, this means that when the psychic asks the question, who's Margaret, he is hoping there is a Margaret in the 10,000 people in the database of that section. If there is no answer, they open the question up to the whole audience's database of over 30,000 people. Would it be surprising for there to be a dozen Margarets in such a large sample? Mentalist Mark Edward relates from personal experience as a psychic performer how powerful a hit can be when someone in a large audience claims a phrase such as a clown in a graveyard statement. Edward describes a mental image of a clown placing flowers on graves and added, "Does this mean anything to someone?" Whereupon a woman stands up and claims that he is speaking directly to her. She remembers it as Edward specifically stating that she knew a man who dressed as a clown and placed flowers on graves in her hometown. Edward reports that it took some convincing to get her to understand that he was not directly talking to her, but had thrown the statement out to the entire audience of 300 people. She made the connection, and because it seemed so personal and the situation so odd, she felt he was talking to her directly. Of course, the clown could refer to anyone seen to be goofy or funny, and the grave could be someone recently or not so recently lost. How many funny people who have lost someone do you know? I'd argue at least one. In short, when it comes to the classic psychic show with a large audience, more often than not, it's a numbers game, and the questions asked are so general and generic that the chances of it not working are quite low. But alright, let's break cold reading down into a couple of more specific examples of tactics. Shotgunning is a commonly used cold reading technique named after the manner in which a shotgun fires a cluster of small projectiles in the hope that one or more of them will strike the target. In essence, all this is just casting the net as widely as possible. How it works is that the psychic slowly offers a huge quantity of very general information, often to an entire audience, some of which is very likely to be correct, near correct, or at the very least provocative or evocative to someone present, observes the subject's reactions, especially their body language, and then narrows the scope based on the reactions, acknowledging particular people or concepts and refining the original statements according to those reactions to promote an emotional response and zero in on a target. A majority of people in a room will, at some point for example, have lost an older relative, or known at least one person with a common name like Mike or John, so saying, "Has anyone lost a John?" John is trying to come through, and then following up with, "John was passionate about sports." Seems specific, but let's be honest here, the chances that someone in an audience might know someone called John who was in any way affiliated with any sport is quite high, because John is a common name and sports is a common interest and hobby. For more examples, here are a few I found online. I see a heart problem with a father figure in your family. Perhaps it is chest pain. Of course, a wide variety of medical problems have chest pain as a symptom, and heart disease is the leading cause of death worldwide, making this a guarantee to have a hit. Likewise, father figure can refer to somebody's father, grandfather, uncle, cousin, or any male relative who is also a parent or has served in a parental role to the person. I see a woman with blackness in the chest, lung cancer, heart disease, breast cancer. As above, most people will know a woman who was diagnosed with one of these problems, which are among the leading causes of illness and death, even if they subsequently recovered. For me, for example, I could interpret this as being about my aunt, who recently recovered from cancer, or my grandmother, who had a couple of heart attacks in middle age, though lived to be 90 and her heart was in good shape until then. I sense an older male figure in your life who wants you to know that while you may have had disagreements in your life, he still loved you. This one is almost cheating. Nearly all people will have had such a person in their lives, and nearly all of them will have had a disagreement at some point. I have a really good, close relationship with my family, but as with all interpersonal relationships, I've had disagreements with all of them in the past. I sense a kindly person who struggles to breathe, perhaps some issue with their lungs. Hey, guess what? A lot of things could be being referred to here. It could be drowning, lung disease, or simply the fact that they are dead and therefore no longer breathing. Likewise, kindly means fuck all. Everyone thinks their loved ones were kind.
I have a mother figure very strong coming around you, okay? And with the name of either Mary, Margaret, do you understand the name? Margaret Mary, okay, Margaret Mary. And I got to tell you that I feel before she passes over, though, there's a lot of hard time to walk or hard time to get up and get things going. Do you understand that? And I feel some arthritis, by the way. There's a lot of arthritis, and there's a bone problem. There's also something with the back. So I don't know if she sees to sit and have a pillow at the back of her,
No.
or is that you?
No.
No? That doesn't make sense to you? Okay, and what about trouble with the legs?
No.
Okay, who has trouble with the legs now?
Well, my father's had 2 hip replacements.
2 hip replacements. He cannot walk as well as he used to.
Oh no, he walks very well.
Okay, okay.
This is something we've been dancing around until now, so let's put a name to it. The Forer effect is a part of human psychology in which we subconsciously make connections between an experience shared by another person and some aspect of our own lives, often searching our entire life's history to find some connection, or reinterpreting statements in a number of different possible ways so as to make it apply to ourselves. It's a symptom of the human capacity for empathy and community. We seek out ways that we can relate to others. My grandmother, for example, likes to use examples from like 50 years ago to relate to my experience nowadays. Barnum statements, named after P.T. Barnum, famous monster and hero of a Hugh Jackman movie, are the statements we've talked about earlier that seem personal yet apply to many people, thus enabling the psychic to reel in a target. This is also, of course, how horoscopes work. Obviously, not everyone who is a Leo or whatever can have the exact same fortune, but by keeping the predictions vague enough but specific sounding, it can seem like they apply to all people who read it. To put it another way, while seemingly specific, these statements are often open-ended or give the reader the maximum amount of wiggle room in a reading to interpret the statements in a way that applies to them specifically. They're designed to elicit identifying responses from people without actually providing any uniquely identifiable information. Once a victim's self-selected, the statements can then be developed into longer and more sophisticated versions of themselves and seem to reveal great amounts of detail about a person, again without actually doing so. A talented, sadistic and charismatic reader will sometimes even bully a subject into admitting a connection was there where there isn't one, demanding over and over that they acknowledge a particular statement as having some relevance and maintaining that they're just not thinking hard enough or are repressing some important memory. You know, gaslighting. And because they can be applied to just about everyone, this can work even. The trick is for the statement to be applicable to just about everyone whilst appearing to be targeting you specifically. Examples of statements of this type might include: I sense that you're sometimes insecure, especially with people you don't know very well. You have a box of old unsorted photographs in your house. You had an accident when you were a child involving water. You're having problems with a friend or relative. Your father passed on due to problems in his chest or abdomen. Obviously, all of these sound specific, right? But they're also as generic as they come. Many people have social anxiety, especially if they've recently suffered a bereavement. Older people often have huge boxes filled with photos back from when physical photos were the norm. A lot of kids have trauma involving water. In fact, I can name about 3 people I know in real life that this could apply to. As mentioned previously, interpersonal relationships have ups and downs, so just about anyone could have problems with a friend or relative at any given time. And likewise, as we just discussed, chest problems cause a majority of deaths worldwide because your chest contains your heart and lungs.
And who's Kathy or Kathy? Is there Catherine or Kathy? Catherine or Kathy? I also know who's Catholic, but there's someone who's Catholic background. And,
Yeah, we all are.
You all are, okay.
Yeah.
So there was a mass said, for instance, wants to thank you for a mass that was said, and there are prayer cards that are said. There's a picture of Mother Mary somewhere around. Picture of Mother Mary. Would you know about this? Do you know about this? Picture
Well,
of Mother
all
Mary.
Catholics have Mother Mary around somewhere.
Good,
in
okay,
the house.
well, I don't.
Usually, you know.
But of course, that was years ago.
That still goes on.
Yeah, so I want to talk about something else with you, though. I said music. I don't know why about music. Did you not do music? Were you going to do music when you were younger and you stopped doing music?
No.
Okay, you never wanted to play the piano?
No.
Okay, who was that one to play the piano? Or music?
Don't know.
Don't know,
No
okay.
one in my family's
Okay.
musical.
The Rainbow Ruse is a crafted statement which simultaneously assigns the subject a specific personality trait as well as the opposite of that trait. By doing this, the psychic can cover all possibilities and appear to have made an accurate deduction in the mind of the subject, despite the fact that a Rainbow Ruse statement is by design vague and contradictory. This technique is used since personality traits are not quantifiable, people are not completely able to self-diagnose their own personality, and also because nearly everybody has experienced both sides of a particular emotion at some time in their lives. Humans are emotionally and morally complex, after all. Statements of this type include, most of the time he was positive and cheerful, but there has been a time in the past where he was very upset. She was a very kind and considerate person, but when somebody did something to break her trust, she felt a deep-seated anger. I would say that you are mostly shy and quiet, but when the mood strikes you, you can easily become the centre of attention. A cold reader can choose from a variety of personality traits, think of its opposite, and then bind the two together in a phrase vaguely interlinked by factors such as mood, time, or potential, in order to get the subject to believe them, to be able to read their innermost thoughts and feelings. The truth is, of course, that all people have been both happy and sad, both calm and angry, and both introverted and extroverted at different points in their lives, even at different points throughout the same day, because people are complex and multi-layered.
Thank you, thank you.
Very intriguing.
Yes, when people come tonight, they'll have a great experience.
Alright, so now we're aware of some of the tactics involved, let us take a look at some examples, shall we? I fucking hate this guy. I don't know if he's a big deal over in the US, but I found out about him from his Netflix show Life After Death, and from there I found out about his show on the E! Network, Hollywood Medium, in which he, well, does fake psychic bullshit for celebrities by basically googling them, and live shows in which he explicitly takes advantage of vulnerable and grieving people. Just look at the state of this fucking shit.
She puts a lot of acceptance so long as the baby was to live, and that was very important for her.
Beautiful.
Oh, I'm just so glad that he made it, because that's such a scary, close call. And we'll talk about where this child is currently, because I kind of am seeing being kept away, and that this is kind of an area of frustration.
There was a person that he was hanging around a lot, whom he had a real tumultuous harmony, weird relationship they had. That person was the last person that he was around.
Yeah.
You know.
I think it's validation today when he comes through of your feelings on it, and the fact that you do know that he would not have been in that situation organically.
At all.
So his big message today is really just this understanding of validating that what you think is correct, and particularly how that pertains to that person. So,
just you being able to tell me that whatever that hunch is.
It's very much real.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you, when I saw you on TV so much with the stars, I was so hoping as a private investigator and in my cases that you being so young and your energy and your passion, if we could use some of that towards cases, you know, cold cases, new cases, that it would help so much.
Definitely. Any way that I can help, I'm happy to.
We're at a standstill with both of these cases. One is an older case and then one's a newer case.
That's interesting as you're talking, without giving too much away. Is there a question with at least one of the cases of whether someone is living or deceased?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that one of the two?
Yes.
Okay. Just gonna give it 1 sec. Okay. This newer one. I don't have this person's spirit coming through. I do have to highlight a female, but they're not giving me any indication of this person being departed. Now, I have to be very clear here. They could be.
We don't think so.
Gotcha. Just gonna give it 1 sec. As a medium, I talk to dead people. If she's not dead, then I have to utilize a different form of ability, something called remote viewing. I'm getting all this just through my own intuition, but I keep getting this feeling of like this person was afraid to speak up. Remote viewing is a means of receiving intuitive impressions, usually about a situation or a place or a person, but regardless, it works on the mental faculties usually attributed to clairvoyance, having strong mental images that end up kind of painting a picture of something that is real and exists. Do we know of any aliases, any uses of a different name?
Yes.
Okay. That's a big part of this situation.
Okay.
That's a big part of this.
That's a big lead because she has a very unusual name. So if it's totally different, I need to go down a different route to find her.
Right. Are there any situations where like her phone, internet, all of that, has that been looked at thoroughly?
You know, we forensically know about it, but we don't have it in hand.
I see. Gotcha. There's something digitally that would give us an indication of what may have happened to her. So think like last text messages, She lived very digitally. Like, there's a lot
absolutely.
there that I'm getting a sense of documented.
Henry is a master of the cold read and just kind of hinting vaguely at things and letting people fill in the gaps on their own, but pretending not to have led them to that point. In my opinion, he's your classic manipulative huckster preying on the vulnerable, and this Netflix show is fucking disgusting, to be honest. Throughout it, he pretends to channel the spirits of dead loved ones for money from their surviving friends and family multiple times, including in the very first episode telling a guy that the ghost of his cousin wanted to pass on that his suspicions about who killed him were accurate, aka literally just making a declarative statement about a literal unsolved gang murder, which, like, well, let's be honest here, it's actually pretty par for the course because, like many famous psychics, he also helps a private detective with some legit cold cases, emulating psychic detectives in both the media and, sadly, the actual police and legal profession, more on this later, in actively hindering criminal investigations with his bullshit. Did I mention that he literally does this shit to the face and at the behest of the grieving mother of the murder victim who turned to him in desperation explicitly for money? And that's just the first couple of episodes. He also claimed to be able to contact the spirit of Michael Jackson because apparently all mediums have some kind of connection to that fucking guy.
There's a very strong emphasis on this. He's acknowledging that he should not have been left alone at a time when he was left alone. And that's coming in, and that's what he's putting a lot of emphasis on. The person who should have been there to monitor wasn't monitoring, and it's like, I trusted you to be there, I trusted the role that you were supposed to have to help me, and you left. And it's like, of all times, you should be right here.
Did something happen while he was abandoned?
It's an interesting thing with this because I feel like when he was abandoned, that would have been an ideal time for him to try to reach 911, to try to call for help, to try to get help. At this time, he realized something was wrong while he was alone, and that's when he was conscious and realizing something's wrong here. But I just don't feel like he had someone to like say, hey, I'm having a medical emergency, something's happening.
No one was there to say that. Yeah, okay.
And so after I realized, okay, there's something wrong going on in here, there's this feeling of, oh, this medication kicks in.
Oh, I see.
I suddenly become affected by this medicine. So it's kind of like a feeling of like, oh my God, what do? I don't want to waste time. Like clearly something's happening, and this happens very fast.
I think what hurts more than anything else is that not only was there a need for someone to be there for him, but there was a trusted person, a person that he trusted, a person that was in that inner circle, and that person wasn't there. And just to hear that, just really, it tears you apart. I just wanted to just cry.
Before I begin this section, perhaps it would be wise to point out that everything I'm about to say about this person is entirely my opinion, which I have formed after having done a little research and read a lot of the publicly available facts and information, and that any declarative statements are alleged and unproven. I say this because from what I've heard, Uri Geller is allegedly notoriously litigious and is pretty well known for, again, allegedly suing people who criticize him for the most trivial shit. So, disclaimer aside, let's talk about Uri Geller, world's most famous spoonbender, birthday of Michael Jackson forgetter, and, heavy quotation marks, psychic, who grew to prominence in the latter part of last century as accused by critics, basically just being a good stage magician who claimed that his magic tricks were due to genuine psychic powers, or sometimes euphemistically just mind power. Geller was originally outed as a magician rather than a psychic by James Randi, with whom Geller had a years-long public feud when he appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Randi later said of the incident that Johnny had been a magician himself and was skeptical of Geller's claimed paranormal powers, so prior to the date of taping, Randi was asked to help prevent any trickery. Accordingly, the show prepared their own props without informing Geller and did not let Geller or his staff anywhere near them. Unlike most of his other TV appearances, when Geller joined Carson on stage, he appeared surprised that he was not going to be interviewed, but instead was expected to display his abilities using the provided articles. Geller said, "This scares me, and as you know, I told your people what to bring, and I'm surprised because before this program your producer came and he read me at least 40 questions you were going to ask me." Geller was unable to display any paranormal abilities, saying, "I don't feel strong," and expressed his displeasure at feeling he was being pressed to perform by Carson. According to Adam Higginbotham, the result was a legendary immolation in which Geller offered up flustered excuses to his host as his abilities failed him again and again. "I sat there for 22 minutes, humiliated," Geller told me. "When I spoke to him in September, I went back to my hotel, devastated. I was about to pack up the next day and go back to Tel Aviv. I thought, that's it. I'm destroyed." This appearance on The Tonight Show, which Carson and Randy had orchestrated to debunk Geller's claimed abilities, backfired. According to Higginbotham, to Geller's astonishment, he was immediately booked on the Merv Griffin Show. He was on his way to become a paranormal superstar. "That Johnny Carson show made Uri Geller," Geller said. "To an enthusiastically trusting public, his failure only made his gifts seem more real. If he were performing magic tricks, they would surely just work every time." By the mid-1980s, Geller was described as a millionaire several times over and claimed to be performing mineral dowsing services for mining groups at a standard fee of £1 million. In June 1986, the Australian Skeptic reported that Geller had been paid $350,000 Australian dollars and granted an option of 1.25 million Xanax shares at $20 Australian dollars each until the 5th of June 1987. As mentioned, Geller has litigated or threatened legal action against some of his critics with mixed results. For example, in 1998, the Broadcasting Standards Commission in the UK rejected a legal complaint made by Geller stating that it wasn't unfair to have magicians showing how they duplicate those psychic feats on a TV show called Secrets of the Super Psychics. In 1999, Geller considered a suit against IKEA over a furniture line featuring bent legs that was called the Uri line because, you know, bending things is his thing. In November 2000, Geller sued Nintendo for $60 million over the Pokemon Kadabra, which he claimed was an unauthorized appropriation of his identity due to the fact that the Pokemon in question has psychic abilities and carries a spoon. Geller also claimed that the star on Kadabra's forehead and the lightning patterns on its abdomen are symbols popular with the Waffen-SS of Nazi Germany, and that the way the name is written in Japanese is visually similar to the transliteration of Geller's own name into Japanese. He's quoted as saying, "Nintendo turned me into an evil occult Pokemon character. Nintendo stole my identity by using my name and my signature image." Pokemon anime director and storyboard artist Masamitsu Hidaka confirmed in an interview that Kadabra would not be used on a Pokemon trading card until an agreement was reached on the case. This wasn't changed until November 2020 when Geller issued an apology and agreed to allow cards depicting Kadabra to be printed, though the last Kadabra card released was in 2003 and has not yet resumed printing. And of course, it would be an incomplete discussion of Uri Geller if I left off the fact that he attempted to stop Brexit with his psychic powers, once writing in a letter to Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, "I feel psychically and very strongly that most British people do not want Brexit. I love you very much, but I will not allow you to lead Britain into Brexit. As much as I admire you, I will stop you telepathically from doing this, and believe me, I am capable of executing it. Before I take this drastic course of action, I appeal to you to stop the process immediately while you still have a chance." He went on to say, 3 years before you became Prime Minister, I predicted your victory when I showed you Winston Churchill's spoon on my Cadillac, which I asked you to touch, and I'm using the power of my mind to ensure that Jeremy Corbyn never gets the keys to number 10 Downing Street. I will ensure that they will bend out of all proportion to ensure that he never takes up residence there. And of course, let's not forget the one time he went on a reality TV show and claimed to send birthday wishes to his friend Michael Jackson through astral projection, but got the time difference wrong and accidentally did so a day early. Oh, and on the same show, he was pretty weird too, and about all of the women he came across, according to some reports, because, of course.
Michael Jackson welcomed thousands of children to his home, often without their parents present. And within 5 years, he was the subject of allegations of abuse that would follow him for the rest of his life. The star vehemently denied abusing teenager Geordie Chandler, and the case was settled out of court when the family accepted an £18 million settlement. One friend of Jackson's says the star was innocent of this first allegation of abuse made against him because he couldn't help but tell him the truth.
In a darkened studio, he suddenly tells me, asks me, Uri, you know, there's this food that I crave for. Can you stop me from eating it? It was very lighthearted. And I said to him, well, I was a hypnotist in Israel. Will you allow me to hypnotize you? And he says, wow, can you really do it? And I said, okay. And then I hypnotized him very deeply. I put him into a very deep trance. And then I did something highly unethical, which I admit today. While he was under trance, I suddenly asked him, and these were the words, Michael, did you ever touch a child in an inappropriate manner? And Michael Jackson immediately answered back, and he says, no, I would never do that. And then I asked him immediately, why did you pay Jody Chandler off millions of dollars? And he answered immediately, I couldn't take it anymore. I had enough. So to me, this was a personal validation that this man is innocent.
Oh, Derek. This one might not be as well known to non-British viewers, but Derek Acorah was an absolute legend on British paranormal TV back in the day. Mostly ironically, because let's be honest here, he was an absurd man who did absolutely insane things, but nevertheless died a very wealthy man. Most people know him from Most Haunted, in which he overacts while talking to spirits through his spirit guide Sam, and acts like an absolute moron while pretending to be possessed or some shit, which is just about the shittiest, most boring and genuinely amateurish production of the genre, but somehow ended up being absurdly popular and shot Acorah to fame and fortune. Yvette Fielding, presenter and executive producer of Most Haunted, initially stated, there is no acting on this program, none whatsoever. Everything you see and you hear is real. Which, I mean, yeah, no shit, you can't exactly go into a ghost show and admit that it's all made up. However, this was later proven to be a lie in 2005, after Acorah claimed to channel spirits with names that had allegedly been suggested to him in advance by a researcher for the show, those names being Rick Edels and Creed Kafer.
Is he telling you something, Derek? Is Sam giving you a name?
Creed! Creed!
Derek? Carl, come forward, Derek.
Anagrams of Derek Lies and Derek Faker. As it turns out, these names were created by the show's then resident skeptic and parapsychologist Kieran O'Keefe and leaked to the researcher in a successful attempt to expose Acorah for hot reading. Speaking in 2006, Fielding said of Acorah, "We tell people everything is real, then it turns out it was fake, so he had to go. I guess it just wasn't obvious when he did shit like this."
Stop fiddling about with my nose, you. Leave my nose alone.
Who's doing that now?
Oh, that's this. Godfrey Parks.
Godfrey Parks.
Godfrey Parks is an angry soul that he does not require, he does not wish, he wishes to be left alone. This belongs to me. Do you hear me? Belongs to me. No one else. No one else. Me. Godfrey Parks. Get you away.
Derek.
Heaven.
Derek.
Hallelujah.
Derek.
Oh.
Derek, Acorah, come forward. Come forward. Carl. Gwen's here. Carl, come forward.
Oh. Get me out, please. Get me out.
Right. Can you stand up, Derek?
Get me out, please. A big metal thing on his wrist here. He's quite proud to show me that.
Right.
Who are you? Who are you? He certainly doesn't want us here. He does not want us here.
Who is he
He's
then?
warning us. Who are you? Come on. Let's see how brave you really are. He's just said these words to me. I'm going to repeat them. Forgive me.
Go
He
on.
said, you are shit. He said to me, you are shit. Oh, jeez, please. Okay.
Who is he?
Who are you?
Give us a name.
What? He's pronounced. Blythe! Blythe! He's saying to me. Go on. More. More. Francis! Francis!
You're Francis, are you? You're Francis? Hmm?
Francis.
Francis. What's your surname, Francis? What's your surname? What's your surname? What's your surname?
I do not have to talk to you.
I want you to tell me what your surname is. Come on.
You hussy.
How am I? You don't scare me.
You hussy.
Am I? I don't think so.
You hussy.
No, I'm not. So tell me. You don't scare me one bit. No, you don't scare me. Don't come near me because you don't scare me. So tell me, what's your surname? Hmm? What's your surname? Come on, what's your surname? What's your surname? What's your surname?
Take thy hand off me, wench.
No, I'm not. I'm just asking for your surname.
Take thy hand off me, wench.
No, you don't scare me. Come on, what's your surname?
Oh, scuttle your legs.
Oh, will you now?
Mm.
Don't you like women?
See your breasts.
Yeah, don't you like women?
Wench.
You don't like women, do
You see your breasts?
Yes, I do, yeah. Hmm?
Move your leg.
It's all right, I've got the camera.
Because that seemed totally genuine. After his 2005 departure from Most Haunted, Acorah filmed a one-off special for Living TV, Derek Acorah's Quest for Guy Fawkes, which is literally just him having googled Guy Fawkes and then using that information to claim to be able to connect with the spirits, and then went on to continue his career as a TV psychic, with shows such as Derek Acorah's Ghost Towns, and possibly the most infamous, though not the most morally repugnant, we'll get to that shortly, moment of his career, the incident in which Acorah appeared in a TV special, Michael Jackson The Live Seance, released shortly after Jackson's death, in incredibly poor taste, where he was shown on live television attempting to contact the singer's spirit, and of course he does a terrible impression. The incident was named the worst TV programme of 2009.
Will Michael answer questions? Can the fans ask Michael questions?
Yes, he would like this. He would like this.
Michael, do you have a question?
Michael. My good friend. My good friend. You have the same love and sensitivity as I. It oozes from you. Please ask me. Please ask me. My friendship will always be alongside you. My friendship will always be strong. My friendship will never ever diminish. Now I've met you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for constantly thinking of me. Your love will banish all the negative things that these people have said so wrongly about me. Thank you. Thank you. Bless you, bless you. Bless you. Please ask.
Michael, I love you so much. Do you realise how much I love you, Michael?
I feel from your sincerity of love. It is paramount to me to receive that love. I love you also.
I love you more, Michael.
My spiritual brother. I will look out for you. Don't be saddened at heart anymore. No more, no longer. There is no need. Let me in my height of love, dance, sound. My friend, calm, calm, my friend, calm. Calm, calm. Calm, Michael.
Wow, wow. We will make sure he is okay during the break. It's time for us to take a quick break. When we come back, there'll be more from Derek and our fans. Do stay with us. See you after the break.
And let's not forget possibly his lowest moment. In 2012, Acorah claimed to have received a psychic message from Madeleine McCann, an infamously disappeared and likely murdered child. For Americans, she's basically the British JonBenet Ramsey, via his spirit guide Sam, stating that the child had died some time ago but would soon be reincarnated. After widespread media outrage, Acorah published an apology to McCann's parents. Turns out, pretending to talk to a dead child whose parents are still around is a really fucked up thing to do, although it seems that he may have been right in his assumption that she'd been killed, as it seems like the police are focusing heavily on a local nonce in the McCann investigation. But let's be honest, that was basically a guarantee anyway. She was plastered all over TV and the internet for years and never showed back up. It's not looking good for her either way, so I'd be extremely resistant to granting him any sort of credit for that prediction. You've almost certainly come across this phenomenon before. It's an inevitable consequence of trusting psychics or treating them with any degree of charitability. If they can communicate with the spirits of the dead and tell you stuff about yourself and your family with a frightening degree of accuracy, then surely, logically, they could use those powers for good, rather than exclusively for personal gain. With great power comes great responsibility and all that, right? And so, of course, thus was born the psychic detective, a charlatan who not only misleads, lies to, and manipulates the grieving families and loved ones of a sadly deceased person, but who further exacerbates those feelings by either giving false hope, by claiming definitively that a missing person is still alive, or additional trauma and claiming that they have spiritual proof that they're not. And of course, on many occasions, psychic detectives have made these assertions based on nothing more than a guess, because as we've just established, psychic powers are not real and been completely wrong. People psychics claim to have been kidnapped and kept alive show up dead, and people who have been said to have been killed have been found alive and well further down the line. But the real problem with psychic detectives isn't that they're wrong or give bad readings, or even the emotional harm that they cause to concerned families, but the fact that they actively damage ongoing missing persons investigations. By taking resources that could otherwise be put to use, or else providing false leads, causing the police to go off on a wild goose chase, searching for something a psychic vaguely alluded to, rather than pursuing more legit and evidence-based leads. Famously, the most important period in a missing persons investigation is the first 48 hours. That's the time you're going to find them most easily and safely. In fact, it's estimated that 99% of missing people who are subsequently found alive are found within this time period. Just 1% are safely recovered after 48 hours have passed. So, probably not very helpful to have someone come in and send the police in basically random directions based on their supposed connection to the spirit world or whatever during this time, eh? Of course, a significant amount of the blame in these situations should rightly fall on the police themselves for relying on such a ridiculous form of evidence, which again is legally just a form of entertainment, meaning that it's like the police asking a fucking clown for their opinion on where to start looking for a missing child. But for the time being, psychic detectives are legal, and there are presumably enough believers in the police to enable this practice to continue on a low enough scale that it's not a massive systemic issue, but often enough that it is notable and concerning. A bit like polygraphs, I suppose. Oh, and of course psychic detectives are not to be confused with paranormal cops, who are just a bunch of professional police officers who do ghost hunting on TV, though it must be said I'd rather cops hunt ghosts through a haunted house armed with a few dorky gadgets than, well, the stuff they've been known to get up to in black communities, shall we say. Unlike the unarmed kid and harmless dogs they're in the habit of treating like enemy combatants in a war zone, at least the people they're trying to interact with in their spare time are already dead. Although it is tragically ironic that their interactions with even dead white people is mostly respectful and about emphasizing dialogue and communication, in stark contrast to many of their interactions with the black people.
When a complainant tells us a story regarding a possible homicide, as police officers, we take that very seriously and do all we can to separate fact from fiction.
And one time I was told that 2 guys came up here and they had a knife fight, and after they were done, one person fell over here and died. And this is what I was told by many psychics, that this is an imprint of blood. And as you can tell, we just sanded this floor 3 times and the stain is still here.
With all this in mind, it would be really quite embarrassing if it turned out that the study of psychic powers and adjacent phenomena was treated seriously by otherwise respectable people, organisations and even governments now, wouldn't it? Let's briefly talk about parapsychology. It probably wouldn't be in any way surprising to you that this so-called science began in the 19th century because, well, a lot of the most unhinged and insane shit that surrounds stuff like this comes from that era, with the SPR, or Society for Psychical Research, which we'll talk about more in the main Ghost Hunters video, continuing throughout the early 20th century as researchers in Duke University over in the US started to focus and dedicate serious resources towards research into ESP, for example, tests like cards and dice, which would eventually inspire the makers of Ghostbusters to include similar fictionalized scenes, basically trying to test if it was possible for certain people to have a higher than chance ability to predict certain outcomes, specifically using cards and dice, carried out by an academic known as Joseph B. Rhine, who was, and continues to be, considered something of a laughingstock among many serious academics for his flawed, biased and frankly absurd claims, none of which could be replicated or substantiated. In 1938, the psychologist, not of the paranormal variety, an actual psychologist, Joseph Jastrow, wrote that most of the evidence for extrasensory perception collected by Rhine and other parapsychologists was anecdotal, biased, dubious, and the result of faulty observation and familiar human frailties. Rhine's experiments were discredited due to the discovery that sensory leakage or cheating could account for all his results, such as the subject being able to read the symbol from the back of the cards and being able to see and hear the experimenter to note subtle clues. Illusionist Milburn Christopher wrote years later that he felt there are at least a dozen ways a subject who wished to cheat under the conditions Rhine described could deceive the investigator. When Rhine took precautions in response to criticisms of his methods, he was unable to find any high-scoring subject. Another criticism made by chemist Irving Langmuir, among others, was one of highly selective reporting. Langmuir stated that Rhine did not report scores of subjects that he suspected were intentionally guessing wrong, and that this he felt biased the statistical results higher than they should have been. But the study of parapsychology didn't stop in the 30s when it was shown to be purely made up, or even in the 50s when it was thoroughly discredited even further. Instead, it was adopted as probable fact and used by the CIA during the Cold War to try and get the upper hand over the Russians until the 90s. No, seriously. In 2017, the CIA declassified around 12 million pages of records, revealing previously unknown details about the program, which would eventually become known as Project Stargate. Among other things, this is also the declassification that many ufologists have claimed contains evidence of alien visitation, because of course whoever comes up with these names is a giant fucking loser. By the time the program was shut down in 1995, so-called psychics, known as remote viewers, had taken part in a wide array of operations, from locating hostages kidnapped by Islamic terrorist groups to tracing the paths paths of fugitive criminals within the United States. Like psychic detectives, but somehow with much higher stakes. Same degree of accuracy though. The roots of Project Stargate go back to 1972, when a classified report made waves within the US military and intelligence communities by claiming that the Soviet Union was pouring money into research involving ESP and psychokinesis for espionage purposes. In response, the CIA began funding its own top secret research because, I mean, why not, right? Maybe they were onto something. Just like the time they decided to glue monkey balls to people in an attempt to create a race of super soldiers. That was legit, so maybe this will be too. Later that year, the research team at SRI invited Uri Geller, yes, that guy, the fucking spoon guy, who sued Pokemon, to Menlo Park for testing. As it turns out, this was not a part of the research into some spoon-based weapon. The CIA was much more interested in another of Geller's self-proclaimed apparent powers, the ability to read other people's minds and even control their minds with his own. According to Annie Jacobson, author of the book Phenomena, The Secret History of the US Government's Investigation into Extrasensory Perception Psychokinesis, catchy title, Geller played a key role in setting into motion the US government's investigation into ESP and psychokinesis. In the winter of 1975, she writes, Geller even took part in a series of classified psychokinesis tests at a top security lab in Livermore, California, where scientists were developing advanced nuclear warheads, laser systems, and other emerging weapons technologies. The implication being, of course, that fucking Uri Geller's powers, which would later go on to fail to prevent Brexit, were on par with those in terms of significance and legitimacy in a military setting. The CIA shut down its work with ESP in the late 1970s, though this was not the end of Project Stargate. In fact, the program simply moved to the US's Army Fort Meade in Maryland, where it was funded by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Over the better part of the next 2 decades, Congress continued to approve the funds for the remote viewing program. It seems to me a hell of a cheap radar system, Representative Charlie Rose of North Carolina told fellow members of the House Select Committee on Intelligence during a meeting about psychic research in 1979. And if the Russians have it and we don't, we're in serious trouble. Army veteran Joseph McMoneagle stood out among the remote viewers. Remote viewers are people who apparently can sense things over long distances with the power of their mind, by the way, who worked with the government's top secret program. As he later told the Washington Post, McMoneagle was involved in some 450 missions between 1978 to 1984, including helping the army locate hostages in Iran and pointing CIA agents to the shortwave radio concealed in the pocket calculator of a suspected KGB agent captured in South Africa. Another remote viewer, Angela Delafleur Ford, was asked in 1989 to help track down a former customs agent who had gone on the run. She recounted the CBS News show 48 Hours. She was able to pinpoint the man's location in Lowell, Wyoming, even as US Customs was approaching him 100 miles west of a Wyoming town called Lovell. So she didn't get it right at all, did she? But never mind. Publicly, the Pentagon continued to deny it was spending money on any kind of psychic research, even after reports leaked out in the 1980s of the details of the government's experiments. Finally, in 1995, the CIA released a classified report conducted by the Independent American Institutes for Research, which acknowledged the US government's long-rumoured work with remote viewing for military and intelligence purposes, though provided very few actual details. The report begrudgingly declared Stargate as a failure, arguing that it remains unclear whether the existence of paranormal phenomena remote viewing has been demonstrated, though the analysts acknowledged that some trials had been successful and that something beyond odd statistical hiccups is taking place. They concluded that any information remote viewing had provided had been too vague and ambiguous and did not produce actionable intelligence. The shutdown of the program did not mark the end of the government's interest in psychic phenomena, however. In 2014, Jacobson writes, the Office of Naval Research launched a 4-year program costing around $4 million to explore the use of premonition or intuition, what is popularly known as a sixth sense among sailors and Marines. Dr. Edwin May, the former Stargate research head, has continued to argue on behalf of ESP as a legitimate tool for military and domestic intelligence long after the program was shut down. In 2015, May told Newsweek that his most recent ESP study, funded by the non-profit Bile Foundation, is probably the best experiment in the history of the field.
Oh, am You don't scare me.
Yes.
Am I? I don't think so. No, I'm not. So tell me. You don't scare me one bit. No, you don't scare me. Don't come near me because you don't scare me.
Fuck psychics. They are a scourge on this earth. They actively prey on the most vulnerable in society, taking advantage of people's grief and loss, using the false promise of being able to speak to a deceased loved one in order to siphon huge wads of cash out of the wallets of grieving people. They are con artists, snakes in the grass, looking for emotionally compromised people to deceive and defraud. They use classic abuse and manipulation tactics to trick you into telling them what to say to make you believe them. They claim supernatural powers that can be demonstrated exclusively in environments prepared by themselves, and immediately flounder when their abilities are tested or when a skeptic rather than a believer happens to be the target. The only real psychic powers are word games, body language reading, and basic psychological tricks. The trade, such as it is, should be outright illegal, and the people conducting it publicly shamed, and any profit given for pretending to be able to temporarily reunite your granny with her recently deceased husband of 60 years seized and returned to the victims. I see these people as no better than phone scammers or crypto rug pullers. They're scum and should be treated as such. Sure, it's funny that the government wasted so much time and money on investigating this bullshit, but let's be honest here, it's still a giant waste of taxpayers' money, and though it was ultimately pointless, the same cannot be said for things like MKUltra, which follows a similar principle. This stuff is harmful no matter which way you slice it, especially given the veneer of respectability and legitimacy by the state and by influential people and organisations. But I will admit that being able to hoodwink these people and convince them to pay you is a little more impressive than tricking grieving people into paying you to lie to them, and if anything, probably morally better as well. I'll cover them a little bit more in future, but when we finally get around to talking about ghost hunters, being completely honest right now, a psychic on a ghost hunting show is irritating and potentially disrespectful to the people they're claiming to speak with on occasion, but that is probably the least harmful part of a psychic's job. A low bar, but at least they do clear it. Alright, rant over for now. See you again soon for more. Hello everyone, it's been a while, hasn't it? A lot's been going on. I've been homeless, that was fun. I had my phone stolen, that was also fun. That's also kind of the reason why there's no names in the credits this video, by the way, because I'm in talks with Patreon, but I've currently lost access to my Patreon account, so I can't see the names of any of my patrons, so I do apologise for that. Anyway, I've got everything set up now. I've got my PC all set up. I've got a new PC. I've got a new place. I've actually got a nice place to live that seems at least safe, unlike my last place. And yeah, I'm doing good. I hope you do stick around. I do have a few plans for some exciting upcoming videos. I might make a couple more political ones as well, but I'm quite enjoying making these more sort of documentary style videos, so I'll probably continue doing these a bit more. I've been wanting to do some more history ones as well. I quite like talking about British folklore, especially old-timey British folklore, so I might do a bit of that as well. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, everyone. I would invite you to join my Patreon, but I'll be honest with you right now, I don't know if there's much of a point. You will still give me money if you join my Patreon, but I won't be able to thank you and you won't be able to get any perks. So basically, if you want to give me money, sign up to my Patreon, but again, I'm not sure how much it'll benefit you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I've got a couple more videos in the works that should be coming out soon. Yeah, so thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.